After this story, you won't dare to go to abandoned villages alone. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. My name is Marcus. I am 19 now, but what I am about to tell happened 2 years ago. After that summer night, none of us could ever be normal people again. I grew up in a small mountain village. It was a quiet place. People knew each other, but they never truly accepted me. Because since my childhood, I felt that I was different. I didn't like talking to people. I wouldn't greet anyone. The people in the village looked at me as if I were crazy, but there was something they didn't know. I wasn't afraid of people. I was afraid of the things I saw at night. And that summer, my friends took me to the place where my past was hidden. To that abandoned village, the place I should have never returned to. Smiling face with horns, our mountain house was right in the middle of the forest. It was a large but old house. Its wooden boards would creak on their own at night. As a child, I thought this was normal, but as I grew older, I began to realize that some sounds weren't coming from the house, but from the outside. Every summer, I would go there with my family. But this time was different because for the first time, I was bringing my friends along: Adrian, Harry, and Mark. The three of us had been friends since childhood, but Mark was different from the others. He was quiet. He wouldn't talk to anyone in the village. Even when people greeted him, he wouldn't answer. Harry used to get annoyed by this. "Who does this kid think he is?" he would always say, but Mark would just stare into the distance, as if he was constantly listening to something. The first day we arrived at the mountain house, everything was normal. Barbecues were lit. My father was telling old stories. But when night fell, Mark began to change. While we were all sleeping, I noticed him walking around. He was looking out the window for hours. When morning came, he would go to sleep. There were bruises under his eyes. Harry was making fun of him, but Mark didn't react. He would just sometimes stare at the blank wall and whisper. One night I saw him sitting alone on the veranda. I went up to him and asked, "Are you okay?" Without looking at me, he said, "There are voices in these mountains." At that moment, a chill ran down my spine because not even the wind was blowing. A week later, Harry said he was bored and started looking for adventure. That's when that idea came to his mind, the abandoned village on the other side of the mountain. That place had been empty for years. People wouldn't go near it. When we were children, the elders in the village told us not to talk about that place, but they would never explain why. Harry found this amusing. "Mark's family used to live there," he said with a laugh. We all looked at Mark. At that moment, his face changed. For the first time, he looked terrified. "Let's not go," he said quietly. But Harry insisted. Adrian also said he wanted adventure. Finally, Mark silently bowed his head, and the next day we set off. As we went deeper into the forest, the weather began to change. The wind died down, the birdsongs vanished. It was as if all of nature had gone silent. Along the way, Mark didn't speak a single word. He was constantly looking behind him. About 2 hours later, we saw the village. But what we saw was not normal. All the houses were destroyed. Some had completely collapsed. The streets were covered in overgrown weeds. It was as if a great disaster had occurred years ago. But the strangest thing was a single house stood intact. The old 2-story house standing right in the middle of the village. Its windows weren't broken. Soft smoke was coming out of its chimney. Harry got excited. "Someone lives here," he said, but Mark froze where he stood. His face had gone stark white. As we approached the house, the door slowly opened. An old man with a long white beard appeared before us. His beard extended down to his chest. His eyes were very strange. It was as if he wasn't looking at us, but inside us. "What are you doing here?" he shouted. His voice echoed through the entire village. Harry took a step back. I immediately said, "Our friend's family used to live here," and pointed to Mark. The moment the old man looked at Mark, the color drained from his face. His eyes widened. His lips began to tremble. Then he stepped backward. "Impossible," he said in a whisper. "You cannot return." At that moment, the wind suddenly started. Howls rose from within the village, and for the first time, we saw black silhouettes moving through the empty streets. The moment we saw the black silhouettes moving through the empty streets of the village, Harry cursed and pulled back. At first, I thought they were human. Maybe there were other people living in the village, but their movements were not normal. They were very fast. They seemed to glide from behind one house to another, and they made no footsteps as they walked. The old man immediately opened the door. "Get inside," he shouted. The fear in his voice was real. Without thinking, we entered the house. The man closed the door firmly and threw a heavy iron lock over it. Then he began closing the curtains of all the windows. His hands were shaking. "They saw you," he said, out of breath. Harry was angry. "Who are they?" he shouted. But the old man didn't answer. Kept staring at Mark. It was as if he had seen a ghost. Meanwhile, strange things inside the house caught my attention. There were old symbols on the walls, dried herbs hung from the ceiling, and a large black circle was drawn in the middle of the house. The man finally stopped and approached Mark. "What did they say to you?" he asked in a whisper. Mark bowed his head. "They never stop," he said. At that moment, Harry looked at me. Neither of us understood anything. The old man introduced himself as Elias. He said he had been living alone in this village for years, but even his voice sounded as if it didn't want to stay here. Then he told us the story of the village. Years ago, people in this village started experiencing strange events. Children would go missing at night. People would hear whispers from empty houses. And then, one night, the entire village went silent as if they had disappeared all at once. The next morning, the houses were found empty. Most people had either died or fled to the mountain. But some changed. Elias looked at Mark as he said this. Some were no longer entirely human. The house fell silent. A faint crawling sound was coming from outside. As I approached the window, Elias grabbed my arm. "Don't look," he said harshly. "When night comes, they see you too." Just at that moment, a heavy footstep came from upstairs. We all froze. Harry asked, "Is there someone else here?" Elias was silent for a few seconds. Then he slowly nodded his head. "My wife," he said. But the expression on his face was not normal. He was terrified. Mark suddenly stood up at that moment. His eyes were staring into a void. It was as if he couldn't even hear us. Then he began to speak in a very strange way, but the voice was not his own. It was thicker, more muffled. "They want us back," he said. At that moment, the air in the room turned ice cold. Adrian pulled back in fear. Harry shouted, "Stop joking around." But Mark suddenly turned his head toward Harry, and we saw that his eyes were completely black. Harry screamed. Just at that moment, a woman's scream was heard from upstairs. Elias ran toward the stairs. We followed behind him. When we reached the upper floor, we saw that the door at the end of the hallway was open. The sound of crying was coming from inside. The moment Elias entered, he jumped back. His face turned stark white. We looked inside too, and what I saw made my stomach turn. An old woman, hanging upside down from the ceiling, was looking at us. Her arms and legs were splayed out like a spider. Her mouth was much wider than normal, and her eyes were completely black. The woman suddenly began running toward us from the ceiling. She didn't move like a human. Harry ran downstairs, screaming in fear. Adrian followed after him. Elias threw the amulet in his hand toward the woman. The woman let out a terrifying shriek. Meanwhile, Mark stood there motionless. Then the woman suddenly stopped. She slowly turned toward Mark, and she knelt. "The master's son," she said in a distorted voice. At that moment, all of our blood ran cold, because when Mark looked at us, the expression on his face was now completely changed, and he whispered only this, "I didn't tell you the truth." The moment Mark said, "I didn't tell you the truth," everyone in the room froze. The old woman on the ceiling was still waiting, leaning toward him. She was like a dog waiting for a command. Elias' face was white with fear. Harry was shouting from below, "Come quick." But I couldn't move because Mark's eyes were no longer normal. They were completely black, and the expression on his face, it was as if he didn't recognize us. Mark slowly turned to us. "My family didn't escape from this village," he said in a muffled voice. "They stayed here." Then he pointed to the woman on the ceiling. "She is my grandmother." My stomach tied in knots, because that thing no longer looked human. Elias started reciting prayers, but his voice was trembling. Mark continued. "This village was cursed years ago. The people here made a deal with the things that live here." Harry shouted from the hallway, "What nonsense are you talking about?" But Mark seemed not to hear him. "When I was born, my mother was still not fully human," he said. "And my father," he didn't finish his sentence, because just at that moment a loud thud came from underneath the house. Thud. The whole house shook. The sound of breaking glass came from downstairs. Adrian looked up in fear. "Someone is breaking in," he shouted. We ran downstairs. The windows of the living room were broken. The black silhouettes outside were now closer. We could see some of them clearly in the moonlight. They resembled human shapes, but their arms were very long. Some were crawling on the ground, and all of their eyes glowed in the darkness. Harry was holding the door in a panic. "We are getting out of here," he said, but Elias shook his head. "You are too late." That moment, Mark suddenly dropped to his knees. He began to hold his head. He seemed to be in pain. Then he let out a scream that pierced our ears. All the lights in the house shattered at the same time. Darkness fell. Only the light from the fireplace remained. And within the darkness, hundreds of whispers began to be heard. They were all speaking at once. "Mark, come back. Return to your home." Harry looked at me, his mouth trembling. "What the hell are these?" he shouted. But I couldn't answer because within the darkness I saw a multitude of hands emerging from the walls. Black, long-fingered hands. They were slowly crawling along the ground, approaching us. Elias took his old rifle. "Run to the car," he shouted. The moment he opened the door, one of the creatures outside lunged at him. Elias fell to the ground. His scream echoed through the entire village. I saw that thing's face for a few seconds. It looked like a human face, but its mouth opened all the way to its neck. It tore Elias' throat apart. Harry began to vomit. Adrian stood frozen. I grabbed Mark by the arm and dragged him outside, because he was still trembling on the ground. But the moment we stepped outside, we saw that the village had completely changed. There were now dozens of black silhouettes between the houses. Some were walking on the roofs. Some were crawling on the ground, and they were all looking at us. We started running toward the car. Harry dropped the keys. His hands were shaking. Just then Mark stood up, and he spoke very calmly. "Stop," he said. We all looked at him. His black eyes had returned to normal, but his face was very pale. Then he slowly turned toward the center of the village. The creatures in the darkness stopped moving. They were all looking at Mark. And at that moment I understood they were afraid of him. Adrian whispered, "What are you?" Mark didn't answer for a long time. Then he closed his eyes. "My mother was human," he said. "My father wasn't." At that moment the wind intensified. A terrifying howl rose from within the village. Mark continued, "One of the things living in this village took human form. My mother thought she married him." Harry began to walk backward. No, he was saying repeatedly, but Mark kept speaking. "When I was born, the villagers found out." His eyes welled up with tears. "That's why they never treated me like a human." Just at that moment, the darkness in the center of the village moved. A silhouette much larger than the others emerged. Its height extended up to the roofs of the houses. Its eyes glowed like embers, and its voice echoed through the entire village. "Son," that was the first time I saw the fear on Mark's face. The moment we saw that massive silhouette rising in the middle of the village, Harry screamed. Because this thing was not like the others. Its height surpassed the roofs of the houses. Its body seemed to be made entirely of darkness. Its eyes weren't red. They were burning like embers. And when it spoke, the entire village shook. "Son," Mark froze where he stood. The fear on his face was real. For the first time, he looked truly terrified. Adrian raised the gun with trembling hands, but he didn't know what to shoot at, because that creature didn't have a definitive shape. It was constantly changing. Sometimes it looked human, and sometimes it turned into a shadow with long horns. The other creatures around us began to kneel. They had all bowed their heads. It was as if their master had arrived. Mark stepped backward. "No," he said in a whisper. "I will not return." But when the creature took a step, the entire village shook. The ground cracked. The windows of the houses shattered. Then it spoke again. This time its voice was calmer but more terrifying. "You belong to us." That moment Mark dropped to his knees. He held his head. He was screaming. It was as if someone was speaking inside his brain. I wanted to go toward him, but Adrian grabbed my arm. "Don't touch him," he shouted, because Mark's shadow was no longer normal. In the moonlight, his shadow stretched not onto the ground but toward the wall, and it was moving. On its own, Harry finally managed to start the car. The sound of the engine broke the silence of the village. "Hurry," he shouted. Adrian pushed me. "Leave Mark," he said, but I couldn't leave him. He was our friend. I was just about to reach Mark when a long black arm emerging from the darkness grabbed him. Mark was lifted into the air. His scream echoed through the entire village. His eyes turned completely black again, and at that moment another voice came out of his mouth. It wasn't a human voice. It was something much deeper, much older. "Run." A second later, all of the creatures moved toward us. Harry drove the car toward us. Adrian and I threw ourselves inside at the last second, but Mark was still outside. The car's headlights were illuminating his face. The long arms of the creature were dragging him into the darkness. Mark looked at us. Black tears were flowing from his eyes. Then he whispered, "Leave me here." Harry slammed on the gas. The car slithered along the muddy road. When I looked back, I saw all the creatures in the village watching us, but none of them were following us because they had taken Mark back. We drove for hours on the mountain road without stopping. No one was talking. Harry was crying constantly. Adrian was in shock. As for me, I kept looking out the rear window because I could still feel something following us. And indeed, it was following. Through the mist, I would sometimes see the long black silhouette. It would appear by the side of the road. Then it would vanish. When we reached the mountain house towards morning, my father was shocked to see us because we looked terrible. We were covered in mud. Even Harry's hair seemed to have turned white. None of us slept a wink that night. But the worst happened in the morning because my father, telling us to calm down, asked a question. "Who is Mark?" At that moment, we all fell silent. Adrian said angrily, "What do you mean, who?" My father furrowed his brows. "You came here as 3 people, he said. "You were 3 people from the very beginning." Blood ran cold. Harry immediately pulled out his phone. He opened the gallery. He looked at the photos we took while coming to the mountain house, and he screamed. Because in all the photos, there were only 3 of us. Mark was in none of them, Adrian said in a trembling voice. "This is not possible," but there was something even more terrifying. We looked at the receipt from the market where we shopped before returning to the village. 3 drinks, 3 sandwiches. It was as if Mark had never existed, but we remembered him. His voice, his face, everything about him. That night, Harry started screaming like a madman because he said he saw Mark in the corner of the room. He kept repeating the same thing. "He is still there." Then the power went out, and from within the darkness, we heard Mark's voice. It was coming from very far away. It was as if it was echoing from inside the mountain. "Take me back." The moment we heard Mark's voice, Harry began to scream hysterically. He was staring at the corner of the room, covering his ears with his hands. "Shut up," he shrieked. But I could hear the voice too. We all could. It was coming from very far away. It was as if it was echoing from empty caves inside the mountain. "Take me back." When the power came back, the voice stopped, but none of us could speak. My father looked frightened because he realized that we had truly experienced something. That night, we all sat in the same room. No one slept. By morning, Harry's eyes were bloodshot. Adrian was lighting one cigarette after another, and I couldn't forget Mark's face. That final look. It was as if he was asking for help, but at the same time trying to push us away. Towards noon, we couldn't take it anymore and decided to go back to the village. My father opposed it, but he couldn't stop us. We got into the car and entered the forest road again. This time the weather was darker. Even though there was sun, a thick mist had fallen, and along the way we didn't hear a single animal sound. It was as if the entire mountain had died. About 2 hours later, we arrived at the abandoned village, but the village wasn't there. We froze where we stood, because ahead of us there was only an empty field. There weren't even ruined houses, just stones and wild weeds. Harry began to scream like a madman. It was here. Adrian was holding his head with his hands. As for me, I was looking for that intact house, but there was nothing. It was as if everything we saw last night had been erased. Then I noticed it. There were old burn marks on the ground, and in the middle, a single tombstone stood. When I wiped the inscription on it, my breath hitched. Because the stone read, "This village was completely destroyed in a fire that broke out in 1987. Beneath it was a long list of names, the names of the people who lived in the village, and at the very bottom of the list, Mark's name was written. Harry dropped to his knees. Adrian began to walk backward. My hand was trembling as I touched the stone, because the birth date was the same as the age Mark had told us, but the death date showed 12 years ago. Then who did we live with? I whispered. Just at that moment, a child's laughter was heard from within the mist. We all turned around at the same time. In the distance, between the trees, someone was standing. Mark. He was wearing the black jacket from last night. He was looking at us motionlessly. Harry began to cry. "This isn't real," he kept saying. But Mark slowly raised his hand, and within the mist behind him, hundreds of black silhouettes appeared. Shadows with long arms, they were all standing between the trees. Mark's voice came through the wind. "You must leave." Then the shadows began to approach him. Mark's face was changing. His eyes were turning completely black again, but this time he didn't look frightened. It was as if he had surrendered. Adrian pulled me by the arm. "Run!" he shouted. We jumped into the car. While Harry was starting the engine, I looked back one last time. Mark was still there, but he was no longer alone. The massive silhouette in the darkness was rising behind him. And this time, Mark wasn't looking at us. He was looking at it. As we drove down the mountain, we heard the same thing along the road, even though the radio was turned off. Distorted sounds were coming through, whispers, and every few minutes Mark's voice was heard. Forget me. After that incident, we received therapy for months. The doctors said we were experiencing trauma. Harry couldn't speak for a long time. Adrian couldn't sleep at night. As for me, I saw the same dream every night: the abandoned village, the misty streets, and that intact house. But the most terrifying thing was this. One night my phone rang. The number was hidden. When I answered, for a few seconds I heard only the sound of the wind. Then Mark's voice came, very weak, very distant. "Marcus." Breath hitched. I couldn't even open my mouth. Then hundreds of whispers were heard behind him, and Mark, crying, said his final sentence. "They won't let me go." I stood frozen with the phone to my ear. Mark's voice was still on the other end of the line. He was crying, but behind his crying there were other sounds. Hundreds of whispers were speaking at the same time. Some were incomprehensible, but I could hear certain words clearly. "Come back. Open the door. Leave him to us." The phone suddenly cut off. I looked at the screen. The number was still hidden. That night I couldn't sleep until morning. I closed the curtains, but I constantly felt like someone was standing in front of the window. When morning came, I called Adrian. My voice was trembling. But the first thing he said as soon as he answered the phone was this: "Did he call you too?" My blood ran cold. Adrian had received the same phone call at night. When we reached Harry, his condition was worse. He said he hadn't slept for days because he claimed that every night he saw Mark in the corner of his room. And each time Mark would say the same thing: "Leave me alone." For a few weeks, life tried to return to normal, but none of us could truly return to normal. We were trying to forget the village incident. The doctors said it was shared trauma, but it wasn't just trauma. Because sometimes at night we would text each other at the exact same time because we were seeing the same dream: the misty village, that house, and the giant shadow standing on top of the mountain. One night Harry called me like a madman. He was crying. "He's here," he was shouting. I immediately jumped into the car and went to his house. Adrian came too. When we entered Harry's room, we saw that everywhere was covered in symbols drawn on the walls. The same symbol, a long black shape inside a circle. Harry was cowering in the corner of the bed, trembling. Then he pointed to the window, and we looked outside. Our breath hitched, because across the road Mark was standing. It was raining. Water was dripping from his black jacket. He was motionless. His face was very pale, and he was looking at us. Adrian immediately ran outside. I followed right behind him. But the moment we stepped onto the street, Mark vanished. Only wet footprints were left on the ground. The footprints continued along the road, and they were leading toward the forest. Adrian looked at me. "This isn't over," he said. The next day, we decided to go to the mountain again. This time, we were prepared. We took flashlights, cameras, and even old amulets left from Harry's grandfather. Harry didn't want to come, but we couldn't leave him alone. In the late afternoon, we entered the forest. The weather was the same again, silent, deathly, and no matter how far we advanced, the road seemed to stretch. Hours later, we reached the place where the old village was supposed to be. But again, there was nothing, just an empty field. Just as we were about to turn back, Harry suddenly froze. He pointed ahead with his hand. A yellow light appeared through the mist, a house light. As we slowly advanced, we saw that house again. This time it looked worse. Its walls were covered in pitch-black stains. There were shadows moving behind the windows, and the door slowly opened on its own. From inside, Mark's voice came. "You are too late." Harry started to run away, but the door suddenly slammed shut behind him. We were all trapped inside, and at that moment, whispers began to rise from all the walls inside the house. Hundreds of voices were speaking at the same time. "Finally, you have returned." When the door of the house slammed shut behind us, Harry screamed and pounded on the door with all his might, but the door didn't even budge. It was as if it had turned into a stone wall. The inside was dark. Only the yellow light of an old lamp hanging from the ceiling was flickering, and the whispers coming from inside the walls were growing louder. They have returned. The door has opened. The sun has come back. Adrian raised the flashlight. The inside of the house was worse than last time. There were black handprints on the walls, and on the floor, dried black streaks stretched out. It was as if someone had been dragged on the ground. And the most terrifying thing, the house seemed to be breathing. The wooden boards were slowly rising and falling. Harry began to cry. "I want to get out," he kept saying. But just at that moment, a heavy footstep came from upstairs. Thud, thud, thud. We all fell silent. Someone was standing at the top of the stairs. Mark. But this time was different. His face was exceedingly pale. The areas under his eyes had turned pitch black, and behind him was a darkness moving like a shadow. When Mark looked at us, for a few seconds I saw our old friend in his eyes. Then he whispered, "Why did you come back?" I took a step forward. "To save you," I said. Mark smiled bitterly. "It's too late now." Just at that moment, the walls of the house began to shake. The lamps shattered, darkness fell, and hundreds of footsteps were heard from upstairs. It was as if dozens of people were walking on the ceiling. When Adrian turned the flashlight back on, what we saw made Harry fall to the ground, because there were dozens of human shapes on the ceiling. Black shadows were moving on the ceiling like spiders. All of their eyes were turned toward us. Mark shouted, "Run!" All at once, the shadows lunged at us from the ceiling. The house turned into a living hell. When Adrian swung the amulet in his hand, some shadows shrieked and pulled back. Harry was throwing himself against the door. As for me, I was trying to reach Mark. But just as I got close to him, the giant shadow behind him appeared. That creature, Mark's father, it was as tall as the ceiling. Its eyes were burning in the darkness, and its voice echoed through the entire house. "He belongs to us now." Mark collapsed to the ground in agony. He was holding his head. Then he looked at me. Black tears were flowing from his eyes. "You were supposed to leave me," he said, crying. But I couldn't leave him there. I grabbed him by the arm. At that moment, the creature shrieked. The house began to shake. Wooden boards were falling from the ceiling. Adrian shouted, "The house is collapsing." Harry finally managed to open the door. We all started running outside. But Mark suddenly stopped, because his shadow was being pulled not onto the ground but into the house. The creature was taking him back. Mark looked at me, and for the first time he looked truly at peace. "Marcus," he said quietly, "I was never entirely human." Then he slowly let go of his hand. The shadows dragged him into the darkness. At the same moment, all the windows of the house shattered. Hundreds of screams rose from inside. We ran and got into the car. Harry started the engine. And just as we were driving away, I looked back. The house was burning, but amid the flames, Mark was still standing in front of the door. He was looking at us motionlessly, and next to him was that giant shadow. Both of them slowly vanished within the flames. After that night, we never went to that village again. In the police records, such a village never appeared. It wasn't on the maps. It was as if it had never existed. But we couldn't forget. We received therapy for months. Harry still cannot sleep at night. Adrian moved to another city. As for me, I see the same dream every night. The misty forest, the burning house, and Mark's voice. Sometimes at night, my phone rings. The number is hidden. When I answer, only the sound of the wind comes. Then from far away, Mark's voice is heard. The door is still open, and each time the same whispers follow behind it. "Bring him back.